You stand at the very edge of the precipice, looking down at the shimmering world you foolishly thought you had finally conquered. You climbed the spiral stairs of gold and heavy promise, believing the roaring applause of the distant crowd below was actually love. But the foundation beneath your boots wasn't solid stone. It was a fragile lattice of written promises, signed in ink that never dries. A shadowy benefactor placed a cold hand on your shoulder, offering a golden ladder just when your tired legs began to tremble. You accepted the help, thinking it was a partnership, never noticing the heavy iron chains woven subtly into the fine silk ropes. Your muscles bulged with artificial strength, a bloated and feverish vitality that felt like true power but tasted like bitter ash. Every single step upward required a piece of your autonomy, a silent transaction conducted in a cold room with absolutely no windows. The wind howled louder as you rose, drowning out the whispered, desperate warnings rising from the forgotten basement of your own house. While your head reached the clouds, the silent termites of dependency were already eating the living marrow out of your weary bones. You sat at the high table, gorging on imports and shimmering tech, while slowly starving the rich soil that originally birthed you. You look in the mirror now and see not a sovereign king, but a wooden puppet dancing awkwardly on silver wires. The wires are pulling tight, cutting deep into your wrists, turning your grand movements into jerky, commanded spasms of a dying engine. The shadow in the corner stops smiling, checking a pocket watch that ticks in reverse time, counting down to your expiration. It is no longer about simple repayment. It is about the total ownership of the ragged breath shuddering in your lungs. The marble floor beneath you tilts imperceptibly, just enough to make you slide helplessly toward the jagged edge you always ignored. The friends who cheered your rise are now standing silent, calculating the salvage value of your inevitable and spectacular fall. You try to step back, but the liquidity that once greased your path has suddenly turned into thick, suffocating quicksand. A fever burns in your veins, the inflation of your own ego reacting violently to the foreign poison pumped into your blood. From this dizzying height, the fall looks endless, a terrifying spiral down into a dark canyon of broken contracts and dreams. You realize far too late that the golden ladder was never built to hold you up, but designed to hang you. You scramble away from the edge, breathless, only to find the golden walls of your palace closing in inch by inch. The air inside grows stale, thick with the scent of burnt copper and the sweat of 1,000 anxious decisions. That shadowy benefactor is inside the room now, sitting comfortably in your chair, tapping a finger on the mahogany desk. You demand an explanation, but your voice comes out as a dry croak, silenced by the weight of the invisible collar. He doesn't speak. He simply points to the ledger, where the numbers have started bleeding red ink across the pages. Outside the window, the machines you bought on credit have stopped humming, grinding to a halt in the suffocating silence. You run to the vaults, expecting to find silver shields, but find only moth-eaten paper and dust swirling in the dark. Panic begins to drum a chaotic rhythm against your ribcage, a bird trapping itself within the cage of your own bones. You try to call your neighbors for aid, but the telephone line is dead, cut by the very knife you purchased. The water in the fountain turns brackish, poisoned by the neglect you justified in the name of rapid, reckless expansion. Your reflection in the polished glass begins to distort, the confident smile melting into a grimace of terrified realization. You signed away the harvest before the seeds were even planted, trading the future for a momentary taste of sweet wine. Now the harvest is due, and the fields are barren, stripped by the cold winds of a market you cannot control. You reach for the heavy crown on the table, but it is too hot to touch, searing your trembling fingertips. The shadow stands up, towering over you, casting a darkness that swallows the last flickering candle of your hope. He offers a pen, not to rewrite the contract, but to sign away the deed to the very ground you stand on. You hesitate, looking for a door, but every exit has been bricked up with the stones of your accumulated obligations. The room spins, a carousel of nightmares where the horses are skeletal and the music is a slow, grinding screech. You realize with horror that you are not the guest in this palace anymore. You are merely the failing janitor. The pen hovers over the paper, a guillotine blade waiting to drop, severing the last connection to your sovereign soul. The pen touches the paper, and the ink spreads instantly across the page like a dark bruise blooming on delicate skin. You sign your name, and invisible chains descend from the ceiling, not to bind your hands, but to hoist you up as a warning. The shadow finally speaks, his voice sounding like crunching gravel, telling you that your freedom was always just a very expensive lease. Men in identical gray suits swarm into the room, measuring the curtains and tagging your family heirlooms with cold, efficient price tags. You are forcibly escorted to the balcony and made to smile at the crowd while a hidden hand grips the back of your neck. The applause below is sparse now, replaced by the low, angry rumble of empty stomachs and the sound of breaking glass. Your pockets are turned out by rough hands, spilling dust and debit notes onto the pristine marble floor you no longer own. The lavish feast is cleared away, replaced by a single chipped plate of hard crusts and a glass of warm, muddy water. You watch helplessly as the ceremonial keys to the city are melted down, recast into bars for a cage you built yourself. The electricity flickers and dies, leaving you in a darkness illuminated only by the predatory red glare of the debt collector's eyes. You try to sleep, but the mattress feels stuffed with thorns, piercing your feverish dreams with visions of the sovereignty you sold. The sunrise brings no warmth, only a cold gray light that brutally reveals the structural cracks running up the palace walls. Your trusted advisors have vanished into the mist, replaced by cold overseers who speak a sharp language of efficiency you do not understand. They demand more production from muscles that have long atrophied, whipping the stagnant air with quiet threats of total liquidation. You walk through the marketplace, a ghost in your own kingdom, unseen by the people who are too busy fighting for scraps. The currency in your hand crumbles to ash, worthless paper that cannot buy a single moment of peace or a loaf of bread. You return to find the shadow sitting comfortably on your throne, wearing your heavy crown which now seems to fit him perfectly. He does not look at you. To him, you are already a statistic, a red row in a ledger marked for deletion. The air grows colder, the oxygen sucked out of the room by the vacuum of interest rates that climb higher every hour. You realize you are drowning on dry land, your lungs filled with the heavy, viscous fluid of compounded errors and regret. You gasp for air, but the atmosphere is thin, meticulously monetized by foreign lungs. The grand infrastructure projects you boasted of are now silent monuments to your staggering hubris. Rust blooms on the steel girders like a spreading, incurable rash across the city's skeleton. The young and bright flee the sinking ship, carrying the stolen future in their battered suitcases. You are left with the old and the tired, staring at a gray horizon that promises absolutely nothing. The shadow benefactor begins to dismantle the walls, removing them brick by valuable brick. He claims it is merely restructuring, but you know it is an autopsy performed on the living. Your pockets are heavy with coins that no longer chime, but thud against your leg like lead weights. The noise of the market transforms into a cacophony of demands you simply cannot meet. You try to close the iron gates, but the hinges were sold to the smelter long ago. Strangers walk freely through your private halls, measuring the frantic beating of your heart. They calculate the kinetic energy of your panic to power their own distant humming machines. You scream for sovereignty, but the word echoes hollowly in the vast, empty vault. The ink on the contracts turns into thick black vines, strangling the marble pillars of state. You watch the sun set on an economic empire that never truly belonged to you. Night falls, and the wolves of speculation howl hungrily at your unguarded door. You have become a cautionary tale whispered with a shudder in the boardrooms of your rivals. The feast is officially over, and you are the main course served on a cold platter of debt. Gravity finally asserts its dominance, pulling the trembling house of cards toward the earth. You close your eyes, waiting for the impact that will shatter the last fragments of the illusion. The impact is silent, not a bang, but a sudden, suffocating cessation of all movement in your world. You open your eyes to dust settling on the broken shards of the promises you once held so dear. The shadow stands amidst the wreckage, not with malice, but with the cold indifference of an accountant closing a file. You try to speak, to beg for a second chance, but your voice is mortgaged property now. The cold marble beneath your knees is real, unforgiving, and belongs entirely to someone else's portfolio. Below the balcony, the silence of the crowd transforms into a low, vibrating hum of betrayal and hunger. Trucks arrive in the dead of night, not bringing aid, but loading up the last tangible assets remaining. Your history books are rewritten to describe your golden age as merely a period of speculative bubble. Shame becomes a physical weight, a heavy cloak draped over your shoulders that you cannot remove. You are assigned a small corner in the basement of your former palace to manage the localized decline. The eyes in the portraits on the walls seem to change, looking down on you with profound disappointment. Your signature is no longer required. Your presence is merely a formality to legitimize the extraction. The blueprints for future cities are used as kindling to warm the hands of foreign overseers. Even the rivers seem to flow slower, choked by the toxic runoff of desperate, unregulated industry. You finally understand that the debt was never meant to be repaid. It was meant to be eternal. You are a fly preserved in amber, a perfect specimen of a sovereign entity consumed from within. Above stairs, the music starts again, a waltz for the new owners celebrating their latest acquisition. You sit in the dark, counting copper coins that are dissolving into toxic dust in your sweating palms. The borders of your land are now prison walls, patrolled by guards whose salaries are paid in foreign currency. You are no longer a character in your own story, but a footnote in someone else's ledger. The family silver is gone, replaced on the shelves by cheap, tarnished pewter that smells of desperation. You breathe air thick with the soot of unregulated factories that burn night and day to service foreign debt. Former allies now cross the street to avoid you, their eyes averting from the walking wreckage of your pride. You hear the sacred language of your ancestors being butchered by merchants haggling over the price of your soil. You attempt to pawn the last medal of honor pinned to your chest, but the broker offers only a pitiful handful of rice. Rain drips through the rotting roof of the grand ballroom, pooling on the warped and splintered parquet floor. The shadow benefactor now sleeps in your master chamber, his snores echoing through the hollowed-out halls. The interest on the debt has become a living thing, a parasitic vine growing thicker around the nation's throat every hour. The harbor is choked with ships that refuse to dock, knowing your credit is good for absolutely nothing. You watch from a cracked window as your people toil in sweatshops, producing luxury goods they will never be able to afford. The National Museum is empty, its treasures crated up and shipped across the ocean to settle an outstanding invoice. You are forced to trade your silk robes for the rough gray uniform of a common laborer in your own former palace. The memory of freedom is fading fast, becoming a blurry dream that you can no longer quite grasp. The shadow raises a glass of your finest vintage wine in a mocking toast to your cooperation. In the streets, children play with bricks made of worthless currency, building towers that fall over in the slightest breeze. The land itself has turned against you, the fields scorched and barren, refusing to yield even a single grain. The invisible chains that bind you feel heavier with each passing day, bowing your spine toward the dust. You dial the numbers of old friends in distant capitals, but the line is always dead, cut by your toxicity. You look at the intricate blueprints of your grand vision and realize you were only ever designing your own intricate prison. The shimmering rise you once celebrated was merely a hallucination. This brutal, grinding fall is the only reality. A final demand note arrives, written on vellum made from the very skin of your nation's history. You walk to the highest tower of your palace, your footsteps echoing like gunshots in the empty halls. From this vantage point, you see the truth. Your kingdom was never conquered. It was simply repossessed. The flags flying over the capital are no longer yours, but carry the sigils of distant banking houses. You feel a cold metal ring against your temple, not a weapon, but the final seal of ownership. Below, the city lights flicker and die, one by one, like candles being snuffed out at a wake. The great machines of industry sit silent, gargantuan corpses rusting in the moonlight. You realize the greatest deception was making you believe that debt was a tool, not a weapon. Your breath fogs the cold glass as you look out at a future that no longer includes you. The shadow figure stands beside you, pointing not to the horizon, but down into the abyss. He whispers that your story will be told as a tragedy of ambition, a warning to others. You try to recall the feeling of sovereignty, but it is a distant echo, lost in the noise of compounding interest. The air becomes too heavy to breathe, crushed by the atmospheric pressure of trillions in unpaid obligations. You see the faces of your children in the crowd below, not looking up in admiration, but in hunger. The foundation stone of the palace cracks with a sound like a breaking bone, signaling the end. You are not a king falling in battle, but a defaulter being evicted from a property you never truly owned. The golden age you proclaimed was nothing more than a gilded cage built on quicksand. You step away from the window, the weight of your failure pulling you down like an anchor in deep water. The final act is not a grand explosion, but the quiet scratch of a pen signing a surrender document. The darkness is complete now, a total eclipse of the nation's soul, brought to you by easy credit. Workmen arrive at dawn to rename your historic boulevards after the foreign bankers who foreclosed on them. You stand in the back of a cold classroom, watching your children forced to learn a conqueror's tongue. The graveyard of your ancestors is churned up by heavy machinery to make way for a pristine export highway. Convoys of luxury vehicles glide through the potholed streets, carrying the new administrators behind tinted, bulletproof glass. Aid packages arrive stamped with smiling logos, but inside there are only shackles and binding arbitration clauses. Massive pipelines snake across the countryside, sucking the fresh water from your aquifers to feed distant, green lawns. The skyscrapers you built to touch the heavens now stand as hollow, wind-swept husks occupied by pigeons and dust. Your doctors and engineers are now digging ditches, their skills deemed irrelevant by the new economic master plan. You look at your identification papers and realize the face staring back is fading, erasing your very citizenship. The interest rates climb vertically on a graph that looks less like a curve and more like a wall. A wheelbarrow full of your national currency is now required to purchase a single, bruised apple at the market. Riot police with corporate insignias on their shields beat back the starving crowds, demanding their dignity. The news reports are cheerful and bright, broadcasting a fabricated reality of prosperity that exists nowhere but on screen. You see infants in the maternity ward being weighed not for health, but for their future tax-generating potential. The sky turns a permanent sickly yellow, choked by the fumes of industries that obey no environmental laws. You try to unlock the door to your own home, but the key no longer turns. The locks have been changed. On the world map in the school hallway, your nation's border has been erased, absorbed into a larger gray blob. The betrayal stings worse than the hunger because it was signed with a smile and a firm handshake. You realize the grand plan was never development. It was always about acquiring a captive market for surplus goods. You kneel in the dirt, not in prayer, but because the weight of the debt has finally crushed your legs. The soil beneath your feet, once richer than gold, is now exhausted, yielding only dust and bitter thorns. You walk through the ghost markets, where the stalls are empty skeletons of commerce that died of starvation. The shadow watches from the balcony, his silhouette a permanent stain on the architecture of your grandest designs. You try to light a fire to keep the cold away, but the wood is damp with the tears of a betrayed generation. The bridges you built to connect to the world are now one-way streets for the extraction of your remaining wealth. Your deepest wells run dry, the water siphoned off to quench the thirst of industrial giants that act with impunity. You stand in the rain, but it does not wash away the grime. It only makes the mud of dependency cling tighter. The ancient banyan trees, symbols of eternal life, are felled to make way for temporary housing for transient workers. Your reflection in the cracked mirror shows a face that is older than time, etched with the map of every bad deal. The music of your culture is drowned out by the incessant mechanical grinding of foreign machinery ripping up the earth. You try to speak your mother tongue, but the words taste alien in your mouth, replaced by the harsh language of debt. The ledger is no longer just a book. It is a physical weight chained to your ankle, dragging you under. You look up at the sky, but the stars are hidden behind a thick blanket of smog, monetization's toxic exhaust. The Grand Theater is silent, the actors having fled the stage to find roles in tragedies that pay in hard currency. You are a captain of a ship with no rudder, drifting helplessly in a storm created by your own desperate choices. The feast you were promised was an illusion. You are left gnawing on the dry bones of your own potential. The shadow offers you a final cigarette, a small comfort before the executioner of foreclosure arrives at dawn. You realize too late that the golden shackles are still shackles, no matter how brightly they shine in the sun. The ground beneath you is not solid, but a thin crust over a deep chasm of accumulated compound interest. You close your eyes and wait for the final gavel to fall, signaling the end of the long, slow auction of your soul. Your army now marches not to defend the borders, but to guard the vast, open pit mines swallowing your ancestral lands. The gleaming universities you built with borrowed hope have been converted into dimly lit barracks for transient, indentured laborers. You watch helplessly as your nation's rarest treasures are auctioned off to anonymous telephone buyers in distant, indifferent capitals. The shadow benefactor no longer whispers from the corners, but sits openly at the head of your ancestral banquet table. The ink from the endless contracts has seeped through your skin, turning your blood into a sluggish, toxic, black sludge. Your national flag is lowered at sunset, replaced forever by a plain white banner bearing only a stark, black barcode. You try to articulate a final protest, but your vocal cords have been repossessed for chronic non-payment of dues. The next generation is born already owing a debt they can never repay, tagged like livestock from the moment of their first breath. The palace walls are crumbling fast, held together only by the thick, suffocating vines of accumulated compound interest. You finally read the fine print with a trembling magnifying glass. You were never the partner. You were always just the collateral. The lights in the capital city are extinguished, save for the blinding, vulgar, neon glare of foreign-owned casinos. Your wisest elders are silenced and ignored, their counsel replaced by the cold, algorithmic logic of distant server farms. The air tastes permanently of sulfur and defeat, a toxic smog generated by factories that pay absolutely no taxes to your treasury. You are forced to sell the very ground beneath your feet, leasing back the temporary right to stand on your own future grave. The shadow smiles, a rictus of pure financial calculation, as he watches you sign away the last remnant of your dignity. Your history is being rewritten in real time by imported scholars to justify the current state of total and absolute subjugation. The hunger in the streets is not just for bread, but for a sense of self that has been systematically starved into oblivion. You realize with horror that the golden ladder you climbed was actually a downward escalator moving faster than you could ever run. The silence in the throne room is deafening, broken only by the sound of the shadow efficiently counting your remaining copper coins. You close your eyes, desperately wishing for this nightmare to end, only to realize that this suffocating reality is the waking world. The bronze statues of your national heroes are dragged away in the dead of night to be melted down for scrap. You walk through streets where the asphalt has crumbled to dust, blowing into the eyes of a defeated and silent populace. The shadow's emblem, a stylized carrion bird, is now stamped on every rationed loaf of bread and bottle of water. You look into the antique mirror and see a stranger's face, gaunt and hollowed out by the termites of ceaseless worry. Your once proud battalions are now reduced to acting as private security guards, protecting foreign assets planted on your own soil. The great river that originally birthed your civilization now runs toxic black with the unchecked runoff of deregulated industry. You scream for help into the void of the international community, but your voice is drowned out by polite cocktail chatter. The ink on the initial agreements has dried into heavy iron bars that cage not just your body, but your future. The traditional songs of your ancestors are forgotten, replaced by the monotonous, mechanical humming of perpetual debt servicing. The shadow now sits comfortably on your ancestral throne, holding not a scepter, but a calculator that clicks incessantly. Every door you frantically try to open leads back to the same cold, windowless room where the first deal was signed. The atmosphere itself feels pressurized, heavy with the crushing weight of unpayable obligations pressing down on your chest. The scholars who once praised the Golden Age now write thick treatises justifying the absolute necessity of your current enslavement. You see the light dying in the eyes of the youth, who know they were born into a bankruptcy they didn't create. The entire machinery of your state is now geared solely toward the efficient extraction of remaining value for distant creditors. The shimmering rise you were promised was merely shining bait designed to lure you into the deepest part of the trap. He watches your slow, agonizing suffocation with the detached clinical interest of a scientist observing a specimen in a jar. The foundational legends of your resilience are being systematically dismantled and replaced with narratives of inevitable and necessary failure. You were never viewed as a sovereign nation by them. You were simply an underperforming asset waiting to be liquidated. You sit alone in the profound darkness of your own palace, a prisoner of the very walls you built with borrowed money. The new tongue you are forced to speak feels like stones in your mouth, heavy with the taste of subjugation. Your ancestral gods have been evicted from their temples, replaced by the cold, monolithic altars of high finance. The shadow is no longer a guest, but the undisputed master of the house, rearranging the furniture of your reality. You realize with a sickening lurch that the lifeboat you were sold was actually made of soluble sugar. The rich loam of your fields turns to fine, choking dust, blowing across a landscape stripped of its vitality. Your people walk with heads bowed, their collective spirit broken on the wheel of perpetual, grinding austerity. The national currency is now printed on paper so thin you can see the lies right through it. The ports are clogged with ships, not bringing goods in, but frantically carrying the last vestiges of value out. Your national anthem is forbidden to be sung, replaced by the terrified silence of a population under constant surveillance. You wander through the halls of power like a ghost, unseen and unheard by the new tenants. The debt is a living, breathing monster that resides in the basement, growing larger and hungrier with each passing day. You look into the cradle and see not a child, but a future taxpayer already shackled to a historic burden. The realization hits you that you are completely alone on the world stage, a pariah state with no friends left. The bright future you were promised is now a dark, collapsing tunnel with no light visible at the end. Your signature is the only thing of value you possess, required only to legalize the final acts of plunder. The land itself seems to cry out in pain, the very stones groaning under the weight of foreign ownership. The shadow benefactor has moved into your mind, his cold logic whispering constantly in your ear, drowning out your own thoughts. You are trapped in a labyrinth of your own making, where every turn leads to a deeper level of indebtedness. Your physical body is merely a vessel for the debt, a biological machine kept alive to service the interest. The darkness is not just falling, it has already fallen, wrapping your nation in an eternal, starless shroud. The rivers are thick with the runoff of desperate industries, flowing sluggishly like the toxic blood of a dying giant. You watch as the grand marble facades of your institutions are carefully disassembled and crated for export to foreign capitals. The shadow now sits at the head of your family table, carving the meager roast with the knife you paid for. Your children look at you with eyes that have aged decades in a single year, reflecting a profound, silent accusation. The airwaves are filled with static, broken only by announcements of new curfews dictated by distant economic stabilization committees. You try to find your way home by the stars, but the light pollution of foreign industrial zones has erased them. The golden ink on the old promises has turned black and poisonous, seeping into the groundwater and contaminating the wells. You stand in the ruins of the marketplace, where the only currency accepted now is the sheer brute force of survival. The shadow doesn't even need to speak anymore. His merest glance is a command that shifts the entire national budget. The glorious history you were taught in school now feels like a fairy tale written for a different species of people. Your very breath is taxed, measured by meters installed in your lungs by the creditors to ensure maximum efficiency. The landscape is scarred with vast open pits where your future prosperity was gouged out and shipped away wholesale. You are a squatter in the palace of your ancestors, waiting for the inevitable knock of the final eviction notice. The silence in the streets is heavy. broken only by the rhythmic marching of boots that do not belong to your army. You look at the blueprints of the grand future and realize they were actually the architectural plans for your own mausoleum. The shadow smiles as he watches you pawn your wedding ring to buy another day of lights that flicker and die. The gravity of the accumulated debt is so immense, it has warped the very fabric of time around your nation. You are trapped in an endless present, where yesterday's mistakes are compounded daily, and tomorrow never actually arrives. The ink on the surrender document is wet, and the pen in your hand feels heavier than the heaviest iron chain. You close your eyes and realize that the nightmare is not the darkness, but the blinding clarity of your total failure. The last marble facade of your grand illusion finally cracks and falls away, revealing the rotting timber structure underneath. The creditors are no longer knocking politely at your door, they are already inside, measuring the bedrooms for their new tenants. Your national identity is being systematically erased from the history books, replaced by a footnote celebrating market efficiency. The language of your ancestors is forbidden in the halls of power, spoken only in hushed whispers in dark alleyways. You walk through the crowded streets of the capital, a complete stranger in the land that bears your ancient name. The shadow benefactor has shed his disguise and now sits openly on the throne, issuing decrees in a foreign tongue. Your children are taught by imported teachers to despise their own heritage as inefficient, obsolete, and embarrassing. The last mineral wealth of your soil is violently ripped from the earth and shipped directly to distant, gleaming ports. You are left holding absolutely nothing but the magnificent, insurmountable debt itself, an heirloom of chains for the next generation. The obligation is eternal now, woven into the DNA of your people, a genetic defect ensuring perpetual servitude. You look up at the monuments to your heroes, and they seem alien, statues of forgotten gods from a dead civilization. The deafening noise of 24-hour industry fills the air, generating immense profits that immediately vanish across digital borders. You try desperately to recall the sensation of true freedom, but it is a fading dream you can no longer grasp. The shadow dictates your every breath, calculating the caloric cost of your existence against your diminishing economic output. You are a marionette whose strings have been finally cut, collapsed in a useless heap on the cold stage floor. The final accounting has been completed in a locked room, declaring you spiritually and financially bankrupt in every conceivable way. The international community watches your slow demise with mild, detached interest, changing the channel when the images get too grim. You realize with blinding clarity that the handshake offered years ago was actually the injection of a slow-acting poison. The invisible walls of the financial trap have solidified into iron bars, closing off the last remaining avenue of escape. You wait in the darkness for the end to come, only to realize with horror that this endless servitude is the end. The grand doors of your nation are finally sealed shut, not to keep dangers out, but to keep the value locked in. You stand outside the gate of your own history, a displaced person with a passport that is no longer recognized by anyone. The shadow benefactor does not wave goodbye. He simply turns his back, already calculating the yield from the next desperate sovereign. The ink on the final ledger dries, cementing a reality where your existence is defined solely by what you owe. Your great cities become ghost towns, populated only by the echoing memories of a future that was sold before it was born. The rivers flow clear again, only because the industries that poison them have moved on to cheaper, more exploitable pastures. You look at the sky and realize even the airspace above your head has been leased to foreign commercial interests. The silence that settles over the land is not peace, but the quiet exhaustion of a long, losing battle against arithmetic. Your children's children will learn your history not as a saga of independence, but as a case study in catastrophic financial mismanagement. You are no longer a player in the great game of nations. You are merely the board upon which others play. The golden chains that bind you have rusted into your flesh, becoming an inseparable part of your national anatomy. You realize that the twist was not that you fell, but that you were never truly permitted to rise in the first place. The illusion of control is finally gone, replaced by the cold, hard certainty of eternal, compound dependency. The world moves on without pausing to look back, leaving you frozen in the amber of your monumental debt. Your monuments are overgrown with vines, forgotten tributes to a dream that was mortgaged and then foreclosed upon. You are the cautionary tale whispered in boardrooms, the example of what happens when ambition outpaces solvency. The final curtain falls not with applause, but with the quiet click of a lock being secured on a repossessed property. You sit in the dark and finally understand that the greatest defeat is not losing a war, but losing your soul to the ledger. The narrative ends not with a bang, but with the silence of a total and permanent erasure from the stage. You are done, a finished chapter, and the shadow has already turned the page to begin writing the next tragedy.